What you are about to hear will fundamentally change how you understand the global financial system, and I need you to pay very close attention because this story is not being covered by mainstream media, and there is a very specific reason for that. Right now, as you watch this video, something unprecedented is happening in the financial capitals of Europe. Central bankers in Frankfurt, Paris, Amsterdam, and Vienna are quietly making phone calls, signing documents, and executing transactions that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. They are systematically dismantling their faith in the United States financial system, and the numbers are absolutely staggering. $9 billion in United States Treasury securities have been sold off by European nations in what experts are calling the most significant vote of no confidence in the American economy since the 2008 financial crisis. But that is not even the most alarming part. What is sending shockwaves through the halls of the Federal Reserve and keeping Treasury officials awake at night is the second part of this story, the part that involves something far more tangible and far more ancient than paper bonds. European nations are demanding their gold back. Hundreds of tons of physical gold bars that have been sitting in the vaults of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York for decades are now being recalled. And the timing of all of this is absolutely not a coincidence. This is a story about power, about money, and about how the arrogance of one man and his administration may have just triggered the beginning of the end for American financial dominance. And if you stay with me until the end of this video, you will understand exactly why this matters to you personally, whether you live in Europe, America, Asia, or anywhere else on this planet. Because when the global financial order shifts, nobody is immune from the consequences. Let me take you back to where this all began, because to understand what is happening right now, you need to understand the game that has been playing out behind closed doors for the past several years. When Donald Trump first announced his aggressive tariff policies against European nations, he believed he was playing from a position of absolute strength. The United States, after all, had the world's largest economy, the world's reserve currency, and the world's most powerful military. In his view, European nations had been taking advantage of America for decades through unfair trade practices, and it was time to put America first. He slapped tariffs on European steel and aluminum. He threatened the automobile industry, and he made it abundantly clear that European nations would either play by American rules or face severe economic consequences. What he did not anticipate, what his advisors apparently failed to understand, was that European leaders had been watching very carefully, and they had been preparing for exactly this scenario. You see, the global financial system operates on something far more valuable than gold or oil or any physical commodity. It operates on trust. The entire architecture of American financial dominance is built on the belief that the United States government will honor its commitments, that it will remain a stable and reliable partner, and that the rules-based international order will continue to function as it has since the end of World War II. What the Trump administration failed to grasp is that trust, once broken, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. And with each threat, with each tariff, with each aggressive statement about allies being treated as adversaries, that trust was eroding in ways that cannot be measured by conventional economic indicators. The decision to dump $9 billion in Treasury securities did not happen overnight. This was the result of months of secret meetings among European finance ministers, of quiet coordination between central banks, and of a growing consensus that the United States could no longer be relied upon as a financial partner. Think about what this means for a moment. United States Treasury securities have long been considered the safest investment in the world. They are the foundation upon which the global financial system is built. When nations have surplus dollars, they buy treasuries. When investors seek safety during times of crisis, they flee to treasuries. The entire concept of a risk-free rate of return is based on the assumption that the United States government will always pay its debts. And now, European nations are saying, with their wallets, that they no longer believe this assumption is safe. Germany led the charge, and this should not surprise anyone who has been paying attention. Germany has always been suspicious of American financial dominance, and their central bank, the Bundesbank, has one of the most conservative and cautious approaches to reserve management in the world. When the Bundesbank began quietly reducing its treasury holdings, other European central banks took notice. The Netherlands followed, then Austria, then France, and soon a pattern emerged that could not be ignored. These nations were not just reducing their exposure to American debt, they were fundamentally restructuring their reserve portfolios in a way that signals a long-term shift away from dollar-denominated assets. But here is where the story gets really interesting. And this is the part that Wall Street does not want you to understand. The money that these European nations pulled out of Treasury securities did not just disappear into thin air. It went somewhere, and where it went tells you everything you need to know about the future of global finance. A significant portion of these funds have been redirected into gold purchases and gold repatriation. European central banks have been buying gold at a pace not seen in decades, and more importantly, they have been demanding the physical delivery of gold that they technically own, but which has been stored in American vaults since the end of World War II. Let me explain why this matters so much. After World War II, many European nations sent their gold reserves to the United States for safekeeping. The idea was simple. America had emerged from the war as the dominant global power, and New York was considered the safest place in the world to store valuable assets. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York became the custodian for vast quantities of foreign gold, stored in massive underground vaults beneath the streets of Manhattan. For decades, this arrangement worked perfectly well. European nations were content to leave their gold in New York, knowing it was safe and accessible if ever needed. They received statements confirming their holdings, and the gold bars sat undisturbed in their allocated sections of the vault. But here is the thing about gold stored in someone else's vault. You are trusting them to actually give it back when you ask for it. And in recent years, that trust has become strained. Germany's decision to repatriate its gold from the Federal Reserve made international headlines a few years ago, and the story that emerged was deeply troubling to financial analysts around the world. When Germany initially requested to repatriate just a portion of its gold holdings, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York essentially said no, or more precisely, said it would take 7 years to complete the transfer. 7 years. To return gold that Germany owned. Gold that was sitting in a vault in New York. The official explanation involved logistical complications, security concerns, and the need for careful verification of each gold bar. But for anyone paying attention, the message was clear. The United States was not eager to let go of this gold, and there might be very good reasons why. This episode planted seeds of doubt that have now blossomed into full-blown action. The current wave of gold repatriation requests represents an acceleration of a trend that has been building for years. Austria has demanded the return of gold held in London and New York. The Netherlands successfully completed a significant repatriation operation and is continuing to bring more gold home. Belgium, Poland, and Hungary have all made moves to increase their domestic gold holdings. And France, which maintains one of the largest gold reserves in Europe, has been unusually quiet about its plans, which in diplomatic terms often means they are preparing something significant. Now let me connect these dots for you because this is where the narrative becomes truly explosive. The timing of this financial rebellion is directly correlated with the escalation of trade tensions and the increasingly erratic behavior of American foreign policy. European leaders have watched as their American counterparts have weaponized the financial system against perceived enemies. They have seen how sanctions can be used to destroy economies overnight. They have observed how access to the SWIFT banking system can be revoked as a political punishment. And they have drawn a very logical conclusion. If the United States can do this to Russia, to Iran, to Venezuela, what stops them from doing it to us if we become inconvenient? This calculation has changed the entire strategic posture of European finance. Having your gold stored in New York suddenly seems less like a matter of convenience and more like a potential hostage situation. Having your national reserves denominated in dollars suddenly seems less like smart investing and more like vulnerability to American policy decisions. The Trump administration's threats and tariffs did not create these concerns from nothing, but they dramatically accelerated the timeline. Every time a threat was issued, every time an ally was treated as an adversary, every time international norms were discarded in favor of transactional bullying, the case for financial independence became stronger. What makes this moment particularly dangerous for American interests is the coordination among European nations. In the past, individual countries might reduce Treasury holdings or repatriate small amounts of gold without causing significant market impact. But when major economies move in unison, when there is clearly a coordinated strategy at play, the effects are magnified exponentially. $9 billion might not sound like much in the context of the $20+ trillion Treasury market, but it represents something far more significant than its numerical value. It represents a change in the prevailing narrative, a shift in the collective understanding of global investors about the safety and desirability of American assets. Markets are driven by psychology as much as by fundamentals, and the psychology of this moment is profoundly negative for the United States. International investors are watching what European nations are doing and asking themselves whether they should be doing the same thing. Asian central banks, Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds, and emerging market reserve managers are all observing this precedent and drawing their own conclusions. If traditionally pro-American European allies are reducing their exposure to the dollar, perhaps it is time for others to follow suit. The gold angle adds another dimension of concern for American policymakers. Gold has been making a historic comeback in the global financial consciousness. For decades, it was dismissed by mainstream economists as a barbarous relic, an outdated store of value that had no place in modern portfolio management. Central banks were net sellers of gold for years, viewing it as an unproductive asset that earned no interest and cost money to store. But that trend has completely reversed. Central banks around the world are now net buyers of gold, and they are buying in quantities not seen since the era of the gold standard. This is not irrational behavior by backwards-looking monetary authorities. This is a calculated response to the recognition that the fiat currency system, particularly the dollar-based system, may not be as permanent or as reliable as previously assumed. Gold represents sovereignty. Gold represents independence. Gold cannot be printed by a foreign government, cannot be frozen by a foreign court, and cannot be weaponized as a tool of foreign policy. In an era of increasing financial warfare, gold is a neutral asset that derives its value from its physical properties rather than from the promises of any particular government. European nations understand this, which is why they are accumulating gold and bringing it home. But here is what really keeps American financial strategists up at night. They understand that this trend, once started, is very difficult to reverse. When one nation repatriates its gold, it gives permission to others to do the same. When one nation reduces its treasury holdings, it makes similar decisions easier for others. We are witnessing a cascade effect in slow motion, and the original catalyst was the aggressive, confrontational approach of American foreign policy. Let me explain what this means in practical terms for the United States economy. The ability of the American government to run massive budget deficits depends entirely on the willingness of foreign investors to purchase Treasury securities. For decades, this was not a problem because demand for Treasuries was essentially infinite. Every nation needed dollars to conduct international trade, and holding Treasuries was the safest way to earn a return on those dollar holdings. But if foreign demand for Treasuries decreases, the American government faces an uncomfortable choice. It can either reduce its borrowing, which would require painful cuts to government spending or increases in taxation, or it can rely more heavily on domestic buyers, including the Federal Reserve itself, which essentially means printing money to finance government operations. Neither option is attractive, and both carry significant economic risks. The irony here is almost too perfect to ignore. The Trump administration's stated goal was to strengthen America's economic position and to put America first in all matters of trade and finance. But the actual result of their policies has been to weaken America's financial standing and to accelerate trends that threaten the very foundations of American economic power. This is what happens when foreign policy is conducted without understanding the complex web of relationships and trust that underlies the global financial system. This is what happens when you treat allies like adversaries and assume that American power is so overwhelming that consequences will never materialize. But the consequences are materializing right now in real time, and they will continue to materialize in the months and years ahead. Because here is the thing that many people fail to understand about financial markets. They move slowly until they move fast. The decline of a reserve currency is not an event that happens overnight. It is a process that unfolds over years or even decades. But there are tipping points along the way, moments when the accumulated weight of individual decisions suddenly becomes visible in market prices and policy outcomes. We may be approaching one of those tipping points now. The creation of alternative payment systems that bypass the dollar is another critical piece of this puzzle. European nations have been working on mechanisms to conduct trade without relying on American financial infrastructure. The Instex system, designed to facilitate trade with Iran while avoiding American sanctions, was an early experiment in this direction. Although Instex has had limited practical impact, it represents something symbolically important. It demonstrates that European nations are willing to directly challenge American financial hegemony when they feel their interests are threatened. This willingness to challenge the dollar system, this willingness to build alternatives, is growing stronger with each American overreach. China, of course, is watching all of this with great interest and is actively working to position the yuan as an alternative reserve currency. The Belt and Road Initiative is, in many ways, a long-term strategy to create a parallel financial ecosystem that does not depend on dollar dominance. If European nations and China find common cause in reducing their dependence on the American financial system, the implications for global power dynamics would be revolutionary. And the Trump administration's policies have, paradoxically, pushed these two blocs closer together rather than driving them apart. Let me bring this back to the gold story because there is one aspect we have not yet discussed that is absolutely crucial. The question that everyone in financial circles is quietly asking, but few will publicly voice, is this: does the Federal Reserve actually have all the gold it claims to hold? The gold in the New York Fed's vaults has not been fully and independently audited in decades. There have been partial audits, internal verifications, and official statements assuring the world that the gold is exactly where it should be. But there has never been a comprehensive, third-party audit that would definitively prove the claims. Now, I want to be very careful here because this is a sensitive topic that can veer into conspiracy territory. There is no concrete evidence that the gold is missing or has been manipulated. But the lack of transparency creates uncertainty, and uncertainty in financial markets is never a good thing. When Germany was told it would take 7 years to repatriate a portion of its gold, people naturally asked why. When the gold that was eventually returned included bars with different serial numbers than those originally deposited, people naturally asked why. These questions may have perfectly innocent answers involving the fungibility of gold and the normal operations of bullion banking. But they also fuel suspicions that something might not be right, and those suspicions contribute to the desire of nations to bring their gold home, where they can personally verify its existence. The strategic implications of all this cannot be overstated. We are witnessing the early stages of a fundamental restructuring of global finance. The dollar-centric system that has prevailed since Bretton Woods is facing its most serious challenge in decades. And ironically, the challenge is coming not from America's adversaries, but from its closest allies. European nations are not trying to destroy the dollar or bring down the American economy. They are simply acting rationally to protect their own interests in an environment where American reliability can no longer be taken for granted. They are diversifying their risks and reducing their vulnerabilities. This is exactly what any prudent financial manager would do in similar circumstances. The question that American policymakers should be asking themselves is how to reverse this trend, how to rebuild the trust that has been squandered. But based on current trajectories, there is little evidence that this question is being seriously considered. Instead, there seems to be a doubling down on the same confrontational approach that created the problem in the first place. More threats, more tariffs, more weaponization of the financial system. Each of these actions provides additional justification for nations to accelerate their diversification away from dollar assets. The historical parallel that comes to mind is the decline of British financial dominance in the 20th century. Britain emerged from World War I as a major creditor nation with a global currency in the pound sterling. But a combination of war debts, policy mistakes, and a failure to adapt to changing global circumstances led to a gradual erosion of British financial power. The pound was eventually displaced by the dollar, not through a single dramatic event, but through a slow accumulation of shifts in investor confidence and international arrangements. We may be witnessing a similar process now, with the dollar's position being gradually undermined by the very actions intended to strengthen it. What should viewers take away from all of this? First, understand that the global financial system is far more fragile than most people realize. The confidence that underpins dollar dominance is not a permanent feature of the universe. It is a human construction that depends on continued trust and perceived reliability. When that trust is damaged, the consequences can be severe and long-lasting. Second, pay attention to gold. The decisions of central banks to accumulate and repatriate gold are sending a clear signal about how sophisticated monetary authorities view the future of the international financial system. They are preparing for a world where dollar dominance cannot be assumed, and you should probably be thinking about this as well. Third, recognize that geopolitical events and financial markets are deeply interconnected. Trade wars are not just about tariffs and manufacturing jobs. They have profound implications for currency valuations, investment flows, and the fundamental architecture of global finance. When politicians treat these issues as simple transactional negotiations, they demonstrate a dangerous ignorance of the complex systems they are affecting. The story of Europe dumping Treasury securities and demanding gold back is not just a story about financial markets. It is a story about the consequences of arrogance, the importance of alliances, and the fragility of trust in international relations. It is a story about how short-term thinking can undermine long-term interests, and how the pursuit of narrow national advantage can ultimately weaken the very position it was meant to strengthen. The Trump administration's threats have backfired in a way that will have lasting consequences for American power. The $9 billion in Treasury sales is just the beginning. The gold repatriations are just the beginning. The creation of alternative payment systems is just the beginning. A process has been set in motion that will be very difficult to stop, and the United States will be living with the consequences for decades to come. For those of us watching from the sidelines, this is a moment of profound significance. We are witnessing history being made in real time. The decisions being taken now by central bankers in Frankfurt and politicians in Brussels will shape the global financial system for generations. And the lesson is clear. In the interconnected world of modern finance, threats and intimidation are not signs of strength. They are signs of a failure to understand the true nature of power, which ultimately rests on the foundation of trust, cooperation, and mutual benefit. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to subscribe to this channel because we are going to continue following this story as it develops. The financial realignment that is currently underway will be one of the defining features of the next decade, and you need to understand what is happening to protect yourself and position yourself for the changes ahead. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand why the headlines about tariffs and trade wars are just the surface of a much deeper transformation in global power dynamics. The old financial order is crumbling. A new one is being born, and the decisions you make now about your investments, your career, and your understanding of how the world really works will determine how you navigate this transition. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and never forget that the official narrative rarely tells the complete story. Until next time, keep watching, keep learning, and keep questioning everything you think you know about money and power.